So I'm pretty sure that you guys have got a gist of this now. I'm going to read the next book of this damned collection, and I'm going to talk about it. So I'm on Leviticus now, and I finished reading it this morning. Let's begin our little review of this strange book, shall we? So Leviticus starts where Exodus finished. Basically, it starts off with God calling Moses into his little special tent, and he basically gives him like the correct procedure of sacrificing animals. And it's a really weird procedure. It's not like anything normal at all. Basically, it's quite long-winded, but all of the different sacrifices are basically the same. You take the animal to the entrance of the tent, put your hand on its head, and the Lord will either accept it or not. And then you burn it or slit its throat. Then you skin it and you cut it up and you wash its intestines and you throw the blood against an altar. It's really barbaric, weird shit that God wants you to do. And when you burn it, it says the odour is pleasing to the Lord. I mean, what kind of twisted shit is this? So in the next section, God basically tells the people of Israel that if they break one of the commandments, then they can sacrifice an animal and he'll be forgiven. So Moses leaves the tent and he tells the people, the Israelites, how to correctly sacrifice the animals, and people do it correctly. They take animals to the tent and they sacrifice them to get their sins atoned. So you guys remember Aaron, right? From Exodus, Moses' brother. Well, after Aaron has done a little bit of sacrificing on his own, his sons, Nadab and Abihu, go to the tent of the Lord's presence and they sacrifice an animal, but God didn't accept the animal. They burnt the animal without first consulting the Lord. You know how terrible that is. So God killed them. He sent a fire and he burnt Aaron's sons to death because they didn't ask God if they could sacrifice an animal first, because that makes sense. And Aaron saw it, he witnessed it. And Moses, instead of being all, "Oh, sorry brother," he was just like, "Well, God did say." And Aaron wasn't even upset, he was just like, shit happens. So they dispose of Aaron's sons' bodies, just throw them in a pit. Don't really know what they do with them, but whatever. The point is, they just dispose of their bodies and forget about them forever. So after that, God gives Moses and Aaron a few regulations about things. Firstly, there's a big regulation about animals which can and can't be eaten. Rule number 1 is that you can eat any animal with split hooves and that chews on the cud. So you can't eat things like camels and rabbits and rock badgers, whatever a rock badger is. You can't eat pigs. Rule number 2 is that you can eat any fish with fins and scales, which is pretty much all fish. But anything from the sea which does not have fins and scales is unclean and you can't eat it. So, shrimp, can't do that. Can't eat shrimp because that would be really bad. Then it says you cannot eat any of the following birds: eagles, owls, hawks, falcons, buzzards, vultures, crows, ostriches, seagulls, storks, herons, pelicans, or bats. You can't eat any of them. Joke's on you, God, because bats are actually mammals. Rule number 4, because that other one was number 3, you can't eat any kind of winged insect, except for those that hop, so you can eat locusts. But who would really want to eat locusts? Then there's this big regulation that says that women who give birth are unclean for 7 days, and there's loads of things that you need to do with them to make them ritually clean again. It's a bit weird. Then there's laws about skin diseases, whereby if it's really serious, then you have to be contained for a little while, and the priest doesn't really do anything about it. He just keeps on examining you every 7 days and saying, "No, you're unclean, you're not holy enough, you need to stay in this room." So then, a little while after Aaron lost his 2 sons, God says to him, "You must atone for their sin." I mean, that's kind of That's not fair, really, is it? I mean, oh, I've killed your 2 sons for a completely unjust reason, but you're gonna have to pay for what they've done. So yeah, he gives Aaron this huge list of stuff that he has to do in order to atone for their sins. He has to bring a bull to the Lord's tent of presence. That was in the wrong order, but whatever. And then, quite interestingly, I fell upon the true meaning of the word scapegoat. Basically, they just get a little goat, and this guy puts his hands on the head of the goat, and all of the sins of the Israelites go into this poor little frail goat, and the goat is sent away forever. Then God tells Moses to tell the Israelites that they're no longer allowed to sacrifice animals away from the tent of the Lord's presence. He says that if they do, they'll be dishonouring him by worshipping the goat demons. Then God goes on to tell Moses about forbidden sexual practices. He says, do not have sex with any of your relatives. And then for some reason it goes down the entire page just listing all of your relatives that you're not allowed to have sex with. Then he says, don't have sex with a woman during her monthly period because she's ritually unclean. So, okay. Leviticus 18:22 says, do not have sexual relationships with another man. God hates that. Oh, not a good one, is it? It's not good. Priests find it difficult to explain why God said that, because, he didn't mean it. He didn't mean it like that. He didn't mean it. So in 19, he basically just goes on and says a load of justice regulations, and I kind of agree with 90% of them, but some of them are really weird. There's stuff like, do not cut the edges of your cornfield, and if you miss a corn, you can't go back and get it, because that's not allowed. But, whatever. I'll let it slide, God. Don't worry. I'm letting a lot of things slide in this series. I think it's good. So then a little while over, he starts talking about the different festivals, which I don't think any of them are celebrated nowadays, but he still told you that you should. But they're ridiculous festivals. He keeps on saying, on this day you do no work, on the next day you do no work, a week later you do no work, if you do work, I kill you. So then in chapter 14 he starts talking about an example of fair and just punishment of someone who doesn't act justly. So in the camp there was a man who quarrelled with an Israelite, and during this little quarrel he cursed God. So he could have gone, you're a foolish man, God damn you. Now I don't think you can quite fathom exactly how ridiculously angry this made God. He was so angry that he got the community to take him away from the camp, and they stoned him to death. Now the thing is, I actually don't know what stoning is. I mean, I know what it is nowadays, because it happens a lot in the East, but back then I don't know exactly how they stoned people, so I'm gonna Google it right now and I'll tell you exactly how horrifying that punishment must have been. Yes, basically, back then it's quite similar to how it is now, except it doesn't really say anything about burying the victim, but basically, in a general sense, the entire community would just throw big rocks at this one person so that it would be like a diffusion of responsibility. No one person would be responsible for that man's death, but, 100 people. It's horrible, really. All the guy did was, blaspheme the Lord, and he got stoned. And then comes the famous line from the Bible, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. I don't really know if I agree with that. I mean, I'm sort of half and half. I mean, I believe in justice, but, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth isn't really the way that I'd go about justice. So then God says something, it's called the Year of Restoration, where, I don't know if it's the 7th year or the 17th year or something, all the things get returned to their original owner. So all the property that you have, you must give it back to a person which it used to belong to, which is ridiculous. But then again, all the slaves get set free, which is, it's nice. But still, if you buy a house, A, the original owner probably doesn't want it because it's crap, and B, you don't want to give it back to the original owner. What is the point of that? Ugh. Right, I need to hurry up because it's getting dark, my lighting has failed, and my camera has mysteriously moved positions. So that's going to make the shot a bit retarded, but oh well, let's continue, shall we? So God gives this massive list of punishments, and basically if you disobey him, he'll punish you really horribly, you know, he'll give you like a disease and shit. If you disobey him again, he'll raise the punishment 7 times, you know, he'll make it 7 times as bad. And he just keeps on going up and up and up until he reaches a point where he basically just kills you and burns you alive and throws you in a pit. So he's not a very forgiving God, but, you know, whatever. You know how it is. Then there's a law placed down by the Lord that if he owns someone, I think, I'm not 100% sure, but if he owns a person, that person can buy their own freedom. And what's interesting here is A, he demands currency, which is really weird. I mean, what's God going to do with currency? And B, women pay less than men. So, you know, sexism going right back to the year minus 5 billion or whatever it was. So we're right on the threshold of Leviticus. So we're right on the threshold of Leviticus now, coming almost to the end, and I didn't really read the end. It's a bit boring, really, but the very last little line, which is 27:34, is, "These are commands that Lord gave to Moses on Mount Sinai for the people of Israel." So, there you have it. I apologise that it was a bit shorter than my other ones, but Leviticus is a very short book. A lot shorter than the other ones, and it was a bit boring as well, nothing really happened in it. But yes, hopefully next week I'll do Numbers. So, see you then.